I recently had an opportunity to read a book titled Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erikson. An intriguing title that belies the assumption we all get when dealing with people who just don't seem to get what we're trying to express to them, despite our best efforts or the seeming simplicity of our message. The book, which was a bestseller and published in dozens of languages, turns out to be an introduction on the DISC or DISC system of psychological and behavioural profiling, which has been conducted on millions of people around the world to help employers assess candidates for a job or for managers to effectively assign teams to a given task. But the essence of the book is to teach us the four principal types of behaviour in this quadrilateral system, of which we all express one dominant type, and usually another one or even two lesser ones. So stay tuned, because I'm sure you'll find this fascinating. The DISC model was first developed in the 1930s by Harvard psychologist William Moulton Marston, PhD, who lived from 1893 to 1947, and who was the developer of the lie detector test, as well as, most peculiarly, the developer of the Wonder Woman character. A number of subsequent researchers have continued to refine and improve on the basic idea of the DISC test, which centres on the observation of four different personality traits, which are currently described as dominance, inducement, submission, and compliance, though there are some small variations in each of those words to still fit the DISC premise. Erikson, for ease of relatability, alters the names to dominance, inspiration or influence, submission or stability, and analytic ability, hence modifying the name DISC to DISA, D-I-S-A, instead. Much of the book is spent describing the key characteristics of each type in terms of how they see themselves versus how others see them. It also goes into detail about the strengths and weaknesses that each trait typically expresses, and then there are a lot of real-life examples that the author uses to illustrate and elaborate, as well as offer suggestions on how to deal more effectively with each of them. The premise is that each of the four traits sees the world through a different set of filters, and that trying to communicate with them from a filter they don't naturally comprehend not only results in a failed exchange, but inevitably into conflict. Erikson's goal is to remind us to identify which type of individual we are communicating with, and then alter our language and strategy to one that would be more likely to yield results. While that might sound delightfully simple, remember that we ourselves are also a type and prone to lapse into automated responses of communication that are typical for our type. Moreover, expecting an outcome from one type that may be natural for you, but not natural to them, is suggested to be the largest cause of conflict in any communication. And Erikson's goal is to raise our awareness of those differences as much to prevent our own frustration as that of those we communicate with. Of course, the really interesting part is when you start getting a grip on the four key types, you find yourself surprised at how accurately your own worldview is described. And then you immediately begin profiling all of your family and friends, often with substantial flashes of insight into those people that help you see them in an entirely new light, and hopefully a more beneficial one. So with that said, let's dive into Erikson's categorization, descriptions, and some suggestions. The four types are often presented in a Cartesian square, with the four traits separated by a vertical and horizontal axis through the center. The top two types define people who are goal or task oriented, which means that the job or issue at hand is what matters most to them. The bottom two types define people who are relationship oriented, which means that they are more people focused and driven by the emotional effects of an issue or a job. In other words, the two top types tend to be very objective in their thinking, while the bottom two tend to be very subjective. The top two deal with facts, while the bottom two deal with feelings. Already you might be seeing how people from the top two types might experience plenty of conflict in their worldview with the bottom two, who see the world in a wholly different way. That's not to say that the top two don't have feelings, they absolutely do, but they don't let their feelings influence their judgment or decision-making process. They consider themselves to be wholly rational, and the bottom two to be irrational, which in their worldview clouds judgment and leads to chaos. Of course, nothing is ever that simple, but conversely, the bottom two see the top two as callous and uncaring, which they are not. So you can see how both top and bottom perspectives struggle to reconcile themselves to accept the operating system of the other as valid, and hence they tend to see each other as stupid. As if this isn't enough, comparing the left to the right proves just as interesting and reflects the level of animation, extroversion and action that they are inclined to. The two types on the left, despite their differences, tend to be on the passive, introverted side. They tend to be reserved, resist change, and avoid direct potential conflict, while the two on the right tend to be active, extroverted, and implementation adoptive, or in other words, welcoming of change. The left keep their foot on the brake, while the right keep their foot on the accelerator. In this system, 4 cardinal colours are associated with each of the 4 types. We are told that there is no particular significance in the choice of colour and that it simply aids memorisation. The top right, or the dominance type, is referred to as a red. The bottom right is referred to as an inspirer, influencer or inducer type and is represented by yellow. The top left is referred to as a compliance or analytical type and is represented by the colour blue, while the bottom left is referred to as the submissive or stable type and is represented by the colour green. According to Erikson, 80% of all people have 2 colours that dominate their behaviour. Only 5% are wholly one colour. Greens are the most common type in society, whether it be their primary or their secondary nature. So let's now look at each of these traits in turn, using the method referred to in Erikson's book. We'll start with how each colour sees itself, and then contrast it with how others see them. Some tips on handling confrontations and negotiations will follow, and then some phrases that are classic signs of each type. The red type. Reds tend to see themselves as independent, strong-willed, ambitious, determined, and effective, all alpha traits that tend to create dominance and power seeking, while others often see them, on the other hand, as pushy, strict, tough, dominant, abrupt, and hard. On the whole, the following characteristics in the table below most easily summarise them. Reds are often described as your archetypical jerk boss or the hyper-competitive slave driver, quick to lose their temper, hustling everyone to hurry up, pointing fingers and threatening to fire people, and actually doing so without a second thought. They often lack tact and aren't interested in the fine details. They want the big picture and they want to know when it'll get done, then expect it to get done ahead of schedule and under budget. They will accept leadership positions voluntarily and aren't afraid of delegating tasks or hurting people's feelings in the process. Often accused of being abrupt, in their mind, they just don't like wasting time on unnecessary verbiage. They like to cut to the chase and get to the point. They hate small talk and conversation for the sake of pleasantries, or for that matter, having long meetings, which drives them nuts. So they will frequently interrupt just to push things along. They love to do business, and being highly competitive, many Reds work harder than anyone else in the room, and, being condescending, they enjoy showing up people they think are lazy or a liability. Erikson tells us that though this all seems highly negative, we need to remember that Reds are goal-driven, not relationship-driven. They have a Machiavellian tendency to believe that the means justify the ends, and that being effective, efficient, and successful is more important than being kind, friendly, and encouraging. Being a leader necessitates making quick decisions, often dramatic ones, to save a company or a project from disaster, which is why so many executives and leaders are Reds. They'll make decisions and take the consequences and keep moving forward the whole time, while others keep going round in circles or sucking their thumb in panic. Reds accept change rapidly and can transform their entire business model overnight if they believe it will profit them. They're neither nostalgic nor sympathetic to people who struggle with change. If they believe in a project, they will go through hell to see it through, but if not, they get bored very quickly and move on to other things. When dealing with a Red, Erikson tells us to avoid manipulating them, cajoling them, or sweet-talking them. They will view that as insulting and scheming. Tell them what you want as concisely as possible, give them the big picture, the time frame, cost, and the benefit to them, and don't waste their time with pie-in-the-sky dreams or details. They'll hold you accountable and you won't like it. But like a Marine drill sergeant, they can push you to become the best version of yourself and then forget your name the second you walk out the door. So some typical sayings you might expect from a Red dominant personality are: time is money. Are we done yet? What's the bottom line? Get your shit together. Stop wasting my time. Next. There's my way and there's the wrong way. Fear is for losers. Who do I have to kill to get something to happen round here? Next comes the yellow type. Yellows, like Reds, are open to new experiences, change, and action. But unlike Reds, who are fiercely goal-oriented, Yellows are all about people and having a good time. They typically see themselves as inspiring, stimulating, enthusiastic, dramatic, outgoing, and most importantly, funny and entertaining, while others tend to see them as manipulative, hot-tempered, undisciplined, counteractive, egotistic, and unreliable. On the whole, the table below shows your typical characteristics that most easily describe them. Yellows are always up for it. Optimistic and cheerful, never shy. They want everyone to like them, and they actually believe that everyone does. They treat everyone, even someone they've just met, like an old chum, and will make themselves at home wherever they are. The most devastating thing for a yellow is rejection. Full of pranks, possibilities, dreams, and ideas, yellows are Peter Pan types who see life as one big fun adventure, but rarely have the personal discipline or the focus to achieve their aims. This doesn't seem to bother them because they always come up with a new scheme, or two, or three, and never give the failed one a second thought, as they always tend to look ahead rather than back. If they do, the failure they experience is always someone else's fault, which they will tell you all about, on and on, until you start looking at your watch and fumble for excuses to escape their orbit. Yellows love an audience, and they hate being alone. They are great entertainers, the centre of any party, telling fantastical stories in great detail and animation, but they'll talk the side off a barn and not give anyone else a chance to speak. They dominate conversations and love nothing more than talking about their favourite subject, themselves. To a yellow, the truth is just a vague concept of no real importance. It's far more important to them to be entertaining than to be accurate. So lies, confabulations, and downright bullshit just goes with the territory. When confronted about making things up, they genuinely seem confused. But if the expose has any possibility of public humiliation, they will explode into denial, obfuscation, and rage to deflect any personal responsibility, of which they have absolutely zero. They are master manipulators who excel in cajoling others to do things for them because they have so little self-discipline to do anything even remotely tedious for themselves. Erikson says that identifying a yellow is easy. He's the one doing all of the talking. Their mouth is usually on autopilot, and they often come up with the most peculiar even ridiculous expression or comments, which they can't seem to account for. When you ask them a question, instead of giving you an answer, they tell you a long and entertaining story full of gesticulations instead, often without even addressing the question. When they do, you'd think they were an expert, so confidently do they assert their answer, even though most of the time they just make things up as they go along, using their vivid and colourful imagination. You'll almost never hear a yellow say, "I don't know," and you definitely never hear them ask, "What do you think?" Yellows love to stand out, follow new trends, and are typical early adopters of technology. They are the ones who camp out in front of the Apple Store for 2 weeks before the new iPhone comes out, just so that they can tell everyone about it. Actually, they are the ones that usually make someone else camp out for them for 2 weeks before the new iPhone comes out. Yellows are eternal optimists and quickly excitable. They think they have all the time in the world and that everything will be just fine. That's one of the reasons why they are so unreliable and unaccountable, because they always believe things will work out, or someone else will deal with it. So working with a yellow can be exasperating, as they are world-class shirkers, all talk and no accountability. But it's usually difficult to stay angry at them for very long because they're so charming and so positive. They definitely bring laughter to any environment, and that charm is their greatest talent. They are born salesmen and born politicians. Being relationship rather than goal-driven, they're often touchy-feely types. They love affection and share it around generously. Like reds, they make quick decisions, but these are usually driven by what makes them feel good rather than what gives the best outcome for all. And this is the selfish part of them. Their feelings are important, and they will waste money and resources on themselves without giving a second thought about its effect on anyone else. Again, on the positive side, their wealth of ideas can help break a stale situation and help you see things from a totally different point of view. And they are, generally speaking, great morale boosters. But beware of marrying one. Charming and fun as they are, when the party ends, and it will, because they tend to be messy, lazy, and unaccountable, you'll be the one left holding the baby and the debt, while they seem confused about why you're always so angry with them. Some typical sayings that might identify a yellow. "That sounds like fun, let me try." "Been there, done that." "The more the merrier." "Can I come?" "Isn't it amazing?" "Nah, it'll be fine." "I promise I'll do it later, absolutely, don't worry." "I'm going to buy myself one of those." The green type. Now we move across to the left side of things, where caution and overthinking is the primary characteristic. Greens, being both introverted as well as relationship-oriented, are all about harmony and are outwardly submissive. They are non-confrontational and will endure untold amounts of stress and trauma without complaining. They are calm, leisurely, and easygoing, and Erikson describes them as the balanced composite of the other colours, which is why there are so many of them, and it often forms the secondary type for those with a dominant other colour. Typically, greens describe themselves as supportive, respectful, obliging, reliable, and pleasant. However, others might see them in a different light, such as being stubborn, uncertain, compliant, dependent, and even awkward. On the whole, the following characteristics in the table below most easily describe greens. Greens don't like to stick out. They're quite happy to stay in the shadows and let others take the limelight. Greens will never forget your birthday. They won't begrudge you your successes, and they won't try to outdo you. Nor do they pester you with excessive demands. They'll just get up and do it themselves, and offer to do something for you while they're at it. They certainly won't take a leadership position unless it's absolutely impossible to avoid, and when they do, things don't usually end well. Greens never make a fuss and they try to avoid offending people. They rarely speak up or stand up for themselves, expecting everyone to do the right thing and play fair. Green children are often described as little angels. However, all this appeasement without any recognition can cause them to eventually become bitter and resentful over time. And the way they tend to vent those valves is through gossip behind people's backs, especially to other greens in a workplace where they tend to carry the bulk of responsibility and get no respect in return. Now, all that might sound negative too, but the greens have a huge tolerance threshold before the resentment kicks in. They'll often allow others to get away with murder before speaking up, so at some point the boiling over into silent resentment is unsurprising. In their dealings with others, their central principle is to always be kind. Being relationship driven, greens will do almost anything to keep the peace or to save a relationship that is on the rocks. Unlike yellows, who, despite protests to the contrary, don't listen at all, and reds, who only listen when there's something in it for them, greens are great listeners, being interested in other people far more than themselves. Introverts, because they talk less, naturally are prone to being better listeners. Greens, who are the archetypical team player, are the supportive and nurturing ones, who always encourage others and volunteer their time and their resources when others couldn't be bothered. Greens often find themselves in sacrificial jobs that pay poorly, but contribute greatly to the public good, like teaching, nursing, or counselling, and are the archetypical shoulder you can always cry on. This selfless and giving nature means that they very often get exploited because they struggle to say no. So when dealing with greens, make sure you acknowledge their contribution regularly through small gestures of appreciation. Validation keeps them happy and keen to work hard for the team. This is also one reason it can be hard to get a straight answer from a green. They're so concerned about other people's feelings, they rarely give away their own opinions. However, unlike reds, who can change their opinion in a flash if it profits them, and yellows, who seem to have many opinions on many subjects, greens rarely change their opinion on a subject once they make up their mind, even if it means living in denial, so many people view them as stubborn. Because they're so stalwart, greens often struggle with change. They don't mind trying new things if given enough time to get their head around it, and are not made to feel too insecure, but they like the comfort of the familiar and dislike the uncertainty of the unknown. That makes them averse to gambling, taking financial risks, or indulging in activities or dangerous sports where someone might get hurt. They usually have a big soft spot for animals. Typical green expressions. The grass isn't always greener on the other side. I know exactly what you mean. I don't like surprises. Let me help you. I'm sorry to disturb you, but can I get you something? Now we move on to the blue type. Blues, like greens, are introverted types, which also makes them great listeners. However, their listening is of a different nature. Unlike greens, who have a sympathetic tendency when they listen, blues are listening for the facts, for the backstory, for a comprehension of what's going on behind the scenes. So they're far less empathic in their listening skills. It also means that they don't feel the need to say very much or give much feedback. In fact, blues often find talkative types both annoying and exhausting. However, unlike the green, who just goes with the flow, the blue is always analysing, assessing, thinking. Blues like to think of themselves as diligent, thoughtful, serious, persistent, demanding, and methodical. However, others might also perceive them as critical, indecisive, narrow-minded, fastidious, moralizing, and cold or clinical. On the whole, their general characteristics are described in the table below. Overthinking is one of the interesting things about blues. Their urge to understand how things work their tendency to organise, systematise and analyse can go in one of two ways. Excellent systems and operational procedures can see Blues become extraordinarily successful and wealthy because they study wealth, its acquisition, and will systematise their business accordingly. Many basement tech entrepreneurs are nerdy Blue types. I'm sure you can think of a few. However, this tendency to overanalyze every last detail can cause them to procrastinate and avoid taking action because they often feel they have to have everything perfect before starting a new venture or a new project. They also hate delegating or trusting others to do their part. This tendency to perfectionism and micromanagement can be their undoing. Many of them have great ideas, but they never get going because they are so risk averse or they insist on getting the planning absolutely right. Fear of failure is their greatest challenge and ironically becomes a self-fulfilling and paralysing prophecy when compared to a red, who takes risks with gusto and even gets off on it, or a yellow, who dives in head first without any forethought whatsoever, believing that everything will be just fine. Blues like to stick with the program and follow the rules, because if something's working, why change it? Blues can always be spotted by their tidiness and organised environment. Everything is where it should be and everything is labelled. Don't touch their stuff. Blues are interested, obsessed with details. You can never give them too much information on a subject that they're interested in. Even in trivial matters, they're often far better read than the average person. Of all your friends, the Blue is the one you refer to as the encyclopedia or the brain's trust. When someone, usually a yellow, blurts out a totally absurd fact as though it were true, the Blue will use one of his favourite interruptions, actually, and then proceed to destroy the presented fact with quotes, references, and journal articles that they usually have on file in a cloud document and can access easily. Any protest or counter story is usually met with additional logic-based arguments that results in the yellow digging an even deeper hole for themselves and finally having a tantrum and storming out of the room. Blues are the ultimate strategists. They find themselves in advisory jobs where they pull no punches and call things as they see them. Like Reds, Blues don't care how you feel about the facts, only that you understand and comply with them. This can lead them to be viewed as cold or lacking in feelings, which is untrue, even more than Reds, who love to argue and throw their weight around. But Blues want you to stick to the cold hard facts. Being goal-oriented like Reds, they hate emotional manipulation and often have a condescending view of people who have no control over their emotions. Think of Spock from Star Trek. That's your classic Blue archetype. They don't have a lot of friends, they don't need many, but those that have been allowed into a Blues circle will get 100% commitment and fierce loyalty because, like Greens, Blues tend to set their opinion in stone once they are convinced of something, which can be a problem if you happen to be a Blue scientist staring down the barrel of a changing paradigm. When a Blue, or a Green for that matter, say they will do something, you can rest assured it will get done, even if it kills them, or you. Blues are persistent to the point of being relentless, so their intense focus on a task can alienate those near to them if they don't understand and make allowance for how a Blue operates. Blues have a tendency to take matters into their own hands, especially when they think there is incompetence all around them. Their meticulous approach often means they struggle to keep to deadlines, often putting them under a lot of stress. So Blues have a tendency towards depression and anxiety, which they don't like to talk about. Their love of strategy means they enjoy games like chess or those that make you think rather than those that rely on chance, which is why they usually find gambling tedious, unless, of course, they are trying to understand the mathematics of probability. Their favourite movie is almost always a documentary. They usually end up teaching, at a tertiary level, or in engineering, medicine, research, or in operational planning, or in IT at high levels. Their obsession with comparing every last detail means they struggle to buy cars or other such items because there are just so many choices, with so many variables of difference that they don't want to buy the wrong one, so they end up not buying anything. Blues are intelligent and set high standards for themselves, as well as for you, which can cause them to moralize and be judgmental. They work hard and they expect you to do the same. However, it's enough for them to know how smart they are and how hard they work. They don't feel a need to shout it from the rooftops, nor to have people make a fuss over them, though, like greens, they appreciate small random acts of kindness and recognition. Some typical expressions you might hear from a blue. Silence is golden. What's the science behind that? Actually, that's not accurate. Have you got some more information on that? Knowledge is power. Follow the rules. I need more time. If you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. Just as an aside, you might find it interesting to observe the differences in the portrayal of movie characters pertaining to the different types, especially those of the lead or the hero. Because there's an expectation that we will develop sympathy or an emotional attachment to a hero, most of them have tended to be yellows because of their charisma, style, and likability, or red because of their determination and alpha status. Their engagement with others, creative street smarts, projection of power, conversation skills, all of these attributes tend to lend themselves to that role naturally. Villains, because of their projection of callousness, power-seeking, and competitiveness, tend to mostly be reds, but when the script calls for a reclusive evil genius that wants order and control rather than money or power for its own sake, they're often blues. Blues are often also the second in command to a red villain because reds want the power and blues construct the system for them. It's typical to see a red villain impatient with his fastidious blue number 2. The trend in Hollywood these days is to try and make their characters much more multidimensional and complex, trying to relativize their good and evil characteristics. So you often see heroes and villains display not only dual characteristics, but often opposite ones at the same time, such as blue-red, or when exploring the idea of identifying with the villain, red-yellow. Or even yellow-blue, which is interestingly often portrayed in an insane character. Greens rarely see any prominence as heroes in this genre, unless they are a dual type and have some kind of useful superpower, such as blue-green, or the emotionally damaged green-red. Pure greens are usually relegated to mentoring and supportive roles, but they sometimes have their character arc develop through frustration and even betrayal when exploited beyond their tolerance. Greens usually take centre stage in dramas that explore themes of suffering, injustice, and personal sacrifice, where their contrasting meek appearance and quiet rage is most easily expressed. Filmmakers have long implemented psychological profiling to enhance or even caricature their characters. Take a note of the clothing and colour schemes often attributed to characters in a film. They often give clues as to their type. Blues usually wear dark, clean, unassuming colours. They tend to be the quiet, lone wolf type. Reds love power dressing that, along with their muscles, often displays their alpha status, while yellows can range from the flamboyant to the full-tailored Italian suit. Greens often associate with earthy, inoffensive, and unassuming colours. So there you have it, a short introduction to the DISC system of personality profiling. I found that it did two things for me. It helped me to make sense of what I considered some of my own shortcomings and peculiarities, and it helped me to better understand those around me, as well as to not hold them up to my own standards, letting go of my own expectations of them and just being okay with it, which isn't easy for a blue. I should just close by saying that this system of profiling has its critics, like anything, that pigeonholes human behaviour into a few narrow options, and that's fair enough. At the very least, it's not even entirely clear if these types are permanent or fluid and changeable through the years, or even as a person's life experience affects them. Perhaps they even change throughout the course of a day, or even in the presence of certain people. But I'm sure that you already have a solid sense of your own position, and probably that of many of your closest friends. And at least that gives you another facet to think about when engaging with them. Hopefully you'll get something from this video too. So please do buy Erikson's book, Surrounded by Idiots. I'll put a link for it in the description below. In case you haven't already figured out which one of the 4 types you primarily fall under, there are a number of free online DISC assessment tools if you just do a search for them. And finally, please do give us a thumbs up, like and subscribe, and hit the notification button to keep informed about new videos. It really makes a huge difference to my outreach, and please do leave your comments below. It's always interesting to read what others have found, because I'm a blue after all. Till next time, walk tall. Cheers.